As we record this program, there are a swarm of bees hanging from a tree limb within about 10 feet of our studio here. And we know that when they're like that, they are scouting around for a new hive. And I'm just hoping that an old garden shed converted to a studio isn't something that would interest them. I don't have it completely sealed either, so I'm not certain what's going to happen with that. We just kind of hope they find some other place. But we'll be talking about Revenge of the Cybermen after this. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd talking today about Revenge of the Cybermen. Now, something I had not noticed before that I have this time is because I'm now seeing the shows in order. Back when they were first broadcast over public television here in the U.S., we found that the shows were not always in the order that they were produced, and therefore the beginning and ending scenes didn't always seem to connect to anything. And when you watch them in order, they do. It seems that every series, every story ends with a preview into the next story. Not necessarily a scenes from next week, but usually just a scene in that causes one thing to connect to the other. At the end of the Santaran experiment, they take the time ring and they go spinning through space. And at the beginning of this, they're spinning through space and then back up at the space station where Ark in Space was done. Now, useful way of reusing sets. In fact, these two, Ark in Space and Revenge of the Cybermen, were actually filmed back to back, so they didn't have to break down the sets. And they spaced them differently when they replayed them. Nevertheless, there is in each of these episodes a tying in scene to take you from one adventure to another. In the case of the time ring, to bring us back to the space station to start this story. Before that, or at the end of this one, in fact, they have a message from the Brigadier. They have to go to Earth. And so the next episode, they will start with the Brigadier. So it's just little tie-in scenes that make it seem like all a continuous adventure. Something that's not unusual these days, but certainly not as common in especially American television during that time. And this was about 1975 when this was done. So what we have is the Cybermen are not shown until the end of the second part. That's common for how the big bads were always identified in Doctor Who. You never put them in the beginning scene making their plans and then introduce our heroes. Our heroes are there first trying to figure out what's going on, and we kind of have to guess with them. Although it wasn't long in this before we saw the first Cybermat. If you knew what a Cybermat was, you kind of knew that the Cybermen were going to be showing up pretty soon. So we know that this is a Cyberman adventure, and a couple of things that you need to know about Cybermen is that they are allergic to gold. So this planet called Voga, which is a planet that has more gold on it than any place in the known universe, is now in orbit around Jupiter. It's been that way for about 50 years, and what was the Ark in Space is now a beacon station, and it's being used to monitor. And this is years before the previous Ark in Space adventure. And it is now monitoring this planet that came into existence or rolled into this orbit. And they have a scientist on board who's established a transmat receiver on it so they can go back and forth and do research. As it turns out, it is not unmanned as they expected, but rather the inhabitants, the Vogons. Does that sound familiar to you? Douglas Adams did write for Doctor Who some years later than this, but no doubt he was, if he didn't come up with the idea somewhere in the intros of the BBC, he probably stole it from this for his own works. Nevertheless, we have the Vogons divided into the Guardians, which are led by Bork, and the Chancellor, whose name was Tyne, who had kind of the civilian population. And they are at odds with each other on when they're going to be able to return to the surface and be able to see daylight and things like this. The Chancellor has indicated that they've protected themselves for eons being below ground, and there's that kind of in the background. Now, in order to show this particular planet, they went to an actual cave not far from London called the Wookiee Hole Caves. Wonder where Wookiee came from when Star Wars came about a few years later. At any rate, Wookiee Hole Caves were reserved by the production crew between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. in order to do most of the filming there. So much of that filming was done at night in actual caves, and you can tell by the lighting and where they had to be that it was a fairly real looking location. It was another very innovative way that they were using sets and locations to keep from being just the planet of rocks or the studio-bound spaceship. The original Ark in Space set, which was mostly used for this, still had a lot of built-up things, so you don't see the studio floor so much, and it gives more of an outer space look to it. It's probably one of the better sets that have been built during that era. So what we know about the Voga, which is a planet that has more gold than any in the known universe, gold is harmful to the Cybermen. And so what the Cybermen want to do is destroy the planet. So they have bribed a human who is on this beacon to help them, first of all, eliminate most of the people on the station so that they can then use the station as a jump point to destroy the planet. And the planet is the Guardians are concerned that they might be attacked and have this rocket that's built, and they don't really trust the humans on the beacon, and this has been going on for about 50 years, but they are kind of itching to have a fight. Back on the space station, they think that they have a plague going on, which is really caused by the cybermats, which were planted by Kelman, who was the traitor who was there to reduce the number of people on the station. Interesting, in the opening scene, you can tell that a lot of the dead bodies along the corridor were actually mannequins, but a way of saving having to dress up actors just to play dead. We see also the doctor once again has his pockets searched, and he has an apple core, a bag of jelly babies, and a yo-yo. And this is something we see for no particular reason, the doctor playing with his yo-yo while he is thinking. A nice line in here is while they're going through the caverns, one of the beacon's people says, I have, we should go by my idea. And the doctor says, my idea is better than yours. He says, well, what is it? He says, I don't know yet. I thought that was kind of a fun line, and it's something that seems to have continued on all the way up to the present doctor, that they have rarely have a real plan, but something always does work out. One of the things that struck me about some of the set dressing was that they used as a door opening button a heat sink with a transistor in it. I thought that was kind of an interesting visual there. If you didn't know what it was, it looked very futuristic, and it's something that you would probably find in old electronics these days. And if you opened up the back of your stereo, you'd see it. The acting was good. Tom Baker always has a way of, and frankly, at the time that this was filmed, the first episode had not yet been televised. And so Tom Baker is still trying out his way of acting, and the production crew is starting to get used to his way of acting. It's written a little bit more for him, and there is the interplay between Sarah Jane and Harry, kind of an adversarial one, but certainly they've always got each other's back, but don't always have kind words for each other. costuming for the Cybermen. You see some tubing and things like that, where we've seen before just the solid handles on their helmets are now something that looks like swimming pool tubing or things like this. So this is stuff that is interesting on how they're able to take everyday objects and convert them to something that looks futuristic. And for the time, it was doing pretty well. We don't see the mouth light up when they talk. They're just talking from behind the mask. They don't have as electronic sounding as they did later. And the Vogons also were under half mask. Their mouths were actual and just made up, and the rest of the mask covered the top part of their head to give them a more alien look. And like I say, for the time, it was reasonably well done. They used their actual eyes, they used their actual mouth, and the rest of it is appliance. And except for a few shots, most of it looks reasonable. So that's what I see from this 4-part adventure, Revenge of the Cybermen, and continued impressive job by the production crew and their set design, their makeup design, and of course Tom Baker's acting. These days it seems like there isn't a single doctor that isn't using his example in their doctor as well. So I'd like to know what you think about this. Please leave a message below. And of course, if you have not yet subscribed and liked the channel, please do so as well. We'd be happy to have you along. And until the bees decide where they go, don't go far.